These lectures incorporate what, after 4 decades of study, studio work, and teaching, I found to be the most important and useful things to know about drawing. Knowing what I do now, it's what I'd have wanted someone to teach me when I was starting out. Many people have the idea that artists stand in front of a model, a still life, or landscape and draw what they see. But in fact, most of the art you've likely seen, drawing, paintings, and the like, was derived at through some mix of what I'd refer to as observation, construction, and abstraction. Drawing from observation means drawing what we see before us. Construction, that refers to the methods for drawing that rely on building what we draw using shapes, geometric solids, and linear perspective. We'll be combining both approaches. Abstraction refers to the way we can bring abstract visual thinking to bear on the drawing decisions we make. An example would be thinking about how we divide a drawing, essentially a rectangle, into 2 horizontal subrectangles to signify a floor plane and a wall plane in an interior, or a tabletop and a wall in a still life, or land and sky in a landscape, or water and sky in a landscape or seascape. The subject matter is clearly different in each of these works, and they're stylistically different too, but all 4 depend on a similar abstract compositional strategy. Much of what we call the formal language or the grammar of drawing operates at this kind of abstract level, even though the content's descriptive and the work might even be classified as realist. To draw a bottle in a still life or a figure in a room, we're really not in a sense drawing a bottle or a figure at all. We're simply drawing lines, but if we get the right lines in the right places, the still life or figures emerge. That means the lines have to be of a certain type and begin, end, and meet at specific points. In fact, even to draw the simple triangular pattern in the first lecture, you had to draw specific kinds of lines that were horizontal and diagonal, and some had to be parallel. Drawing these kinds of lines and having them meet at specific points involves measuring. We'll be calling on these skills throughout the course, so practicing all this is a good place to start. There's an entry in Leonardo's journals titled "The giochi che debbono fare I disegnatori," the games that people who draw should play. He begins by saying, quote, "You should always practice such things as may be of use, giving your eye good practice in judging accurately." He goes on to describe a competitive measuring game where one person draws a straight line on a wall. Then all the others, standing at the same distance from the wall, try to gauge the line's length. Who's ever closest wins. Here are several games or first exercises I'd like you to try. They all benefit eye-hand coordination and will help you when drawing everything from a still life to a landscape to the figure. In that sense, they're pretty serious games. So try drawing a horizontal line, and then find the half measure, then the quarters, then the eighths. Then try and draw a line that's parallel to the first line you just drew. And then you can try doing that vertically as well, parallel vertical lines. And try diagonals too. Here's another great first exercise. Give yourself a point, and then another point, and just connect them with a straight line. You can kind of trace over lightly what we call phantom drawing, just moving the pencil back and forth to get an idea of the angle. You can even leave little traces of graphite as you go. And then when you feel like you have an idea about where that line is going, let the pencil touch the page and pull your line across. Let's try another one. We'll just add another dot. Again, the same thing, tracing back and forth over the line, over the direction, and as you gain confidence, make the line. And let's do one more. Make another diagonal. Give yourself another point. Trace back and forth over the page. Leave small amounts of graphite, and then make your line. Another exercise is making curved lines. So far we've made verticals, horizontals, and diagonals. We can give ourselves 2 marks along a line segment, find the center point, and then try and find an even curve going from one to the other. Follow the same process. When you feel comfortable, make the line. So here's another exercise. Give yourself a vertical, then cross it with a horizontal, and then draw the 45s through the center. All this is great aiming practice. And then try and take an even curve around the whole thing. We've been drawing horizontal, vertical, diagonal, and curvilinear lines. When we draw with line, those are our major directions. Those are the major types of lines we'll be using. If we practice those kinds of lines, we'll be in good shape to do a lot of different kinds of drawing. I'll make a curved line segment, then another, a vertical, another, horizontal, diagonal, another diagonal. If we can associate lines with measure, we can begin to draw all kinds of complex things. Diagonal, diagonal, horizontal, and I think you can see where this is going. I'll draw a figure standing in a room, and what you'll find is that all the lines I use are either horizontal, vertical, diagonal, and curvilinear lines. Once you've tried this with your graphite, try it with your other materials too. Charcoal, pen and ink, just drawing lines. And I can draw a rug on the floor with a pattern. It's just made up of diagonal and horizontal lines. To draw a light fixture on a ceiling, all I need is some curvilinear line, here grouped into an ovoid, two verticals, and another curvilinear line segment. A curtain on a window, nothing more than some horizontals and some curvilinear line segments. One of our powerful tools is overlap. If I show that the curtain is securely overlapping the wall, we'll feel that it's in front and the wall's behind. At the bottom of the curtains, now I'm drawing cross contours, and we'll learn about those in a coming lesson. They help give us a sense of three-dimensionality when we're drawing with line. We can take flat things and make them feel three-dimensional by adding planes. I can take the flat shape of the painting on the wall and make it dimensional by giving it a plane too. We can take those simple shapes and make slight adaptations to make them more resemble things like an arm, a leg, a breast, taper them a little more, round a little here, more angular there. Small adaptations to some very regular shapes. You'll learn to control the viewer's eye and create focal areas and focal points by creating hierarchies of value. All else being equal, where there's higher contrast, well, that's where our eye is going to go first. I think you'll find that studying drawing's a lot like studying a language. We just started with some lines. They're like the letters of the alphabet. And as you see, we can use them to draw figures and all kinds of other things. Just like letters forming words, verbs and nouns, adjectives and adverbs, and soon we'll be constructing sentences and paragraphs, whole compositions. In this way, the lectures build cumulatively in a step-by-step fashion, with each new idea or concept building on the previous ones. We don't think much about the underlying grammatical structure of the sentences we create and hear as we go through a typical language-saturated day. One exception, of course, is when we're speaking a foreign language, one that we're not too familiar with yet. And we think, oh yeah, the verb needs to go over here, and it needs this termination to agree with my pronoun, and right, the indirect object gets shuttled over there. But as you begin to master the language, all this becomes more and more automatic and natural. Similarly, if you're learning to play a musical instrument, at first you're hyper-conscious of which finger goes where, but after some practice you think much less about the mechanics and more about the music itself. You'll likely find the same thing here. A whole lot of what we call instinct, or having even a feel for something, is often really an instance of deeply ingrained learning. Einstein once said, "Intuition is nothing but the outcome of earlier intellectual experience." In drawing, our grammatical parts are line, shape, volume, mark, value, color, amongst a number of others. If we want to begin to make sophisticated drawings, we have to begin to understand how these pieces function in the visual realm. The approach is pretty simple. I'll describe and explain a new concept or technique. I'll situate it in its historical context and illustrate it with visual examples. These will include my own drawings and diagrams, additional ones created by the very talented team here at the Great Courses, examples from my students, and masterworks from a range of periods and traditions in the history of art. One art historical cliche describes that history as a series of advances through tumultuous breaks from the ignorance or overbearing restrictions of the past conventions. There's also a lot of ink dedicated to showing how one culture's art is markedly different from that of another. No doubt, art has certainly changed with time and place. But at the same time, I think you'll find as you move through these lectures that there's also been a great degree of continuity in drawing's language across all the continents and over millennia of drawing practice. Earlier, I showed this watercolor by Thomas Eakins, a 19th century American. I used it as an example of the way which artists compose. In this case, the drawing's shape, a rectangle, is divided into two sub-rectangles, a lower one for water and an upper one for sky. I could equally have chosen a 13th century Chinese example to demonstrate the same point. This is titled Mountain Market Clear with Rising Mist by Xia Gui. Again, the rectangle is divided in half. The lower rectangle contains the near landscape, the upper, the mountains receding in the distance, and the sky. I'd suggest the reason why many diverse people have employed similar visual strategies is because our eyes and brains, our hardware and software, have remained pretty much the same for a very long period. So, a fair portion of the underlying visual mechanics of making drawings has remained pretty consistent. It's one of the reasons why we can look at art made by people who lived very different lives from our own and find the things they made evocative, potent, and beautiful. At a certain level, we get it because these works were crafted to speak to beings who were wired just like ourselves. I've made it a point in my teaching at the university and in these lectures here to include examples of artworks from a range of periods, cultures, and geographic locations. My thinking has been that if artists cumulatively in different times and places have used the same strategy or technique for millennia, and their work has stood the test of time and local bias, it's reasonable to suspect that the visual idea is a good one and has some real staying power. The examples I use also vary in terms of material or media too. Of course, I've called upon all types of drawings from graphite to charcoal to pen or brush and ink, obviously so. But I've also included examples from directly related fields, from art practices which are direct extensions of drawings per se, like painting and printmaking. In the first lecture, I defined drawing as marking surfaces. With that in mind, I've included the incised piece of ochre from the Blombos Cave, as well as painted ceramics, Chinese brush paintings on silk, and in a more contemporary vein, examples from comics and animation. As I noted in the first lecture, drawing has been and is going on all around us in many shapes and forms. In choosing each example, my main criteria has been that it effectively illustrates the visual point being made. Looking at drawing is as important to an aspiring draftsperson as listening to music, tasting food, or watching the game is to an aspiring musician, chef, or athlete. But it's crucial to make the shift to active analysis. I drive a car, but it ends there. Someone who loves cars, wants to understand them deeply, takes a car apart and puts it back together again, or better yet, several cars. To be a real student of drawing means that your relationship with drawing has to become analytical. We have to take drawings apart, reverse engineer them, and put them back together again. I'll be helping you develop the abilities needed to understand how a given drawing has been made and why it's been made the way it has. If you can begin to learn how to do this on your own, you'll be well on your way to becoming a successful draftsperson and autodidact. Studying examples is very important. Many are available online for download, others in books on drawing. Build your own image library so you can consult them as you draw. As I noted earlier, I've supplemented the examples of artworks by professional artists to include numerous examples by my students. Of course, I've chosen very good and excellent examples, but my students do very good and excellent work on a regular basis. These examples will give you a clear visual take on possible responses to a given drawing problem. They should also serve as encouragement and inspiration. What we're doing here is absolutely doable. People just like you learn to draw all the time. Each lecture is about 30 minutes long. It'll generally take you much longer than that to complete the drawing projects I'll describe, so you may want to stop and start the lectures at intervals. That said, if you wanted to watch the whole thing through and just listen and then go back and replay the videos doing the exercise a second time, wouldn't be doing yourself any harm. In learning to draw, one-on-one feedback can be really helpful. So if you have a family member, a friend, or even better, a couple friends who are also interested in learning to draw, you'd likely find it useful to work together. You might want to watch the lessons together or perhaps meet once a week to get together to critique each other's drawings. It can also keep you motivated. Getting together with others to talk about art and drawing can also be a lot of fun. Whether or not you pursue art beyond this course, I think you'll find that studying drawing will change the way you experience your own visual perception. It will literally change the way you see the world and significantly change the way you'll be able to appreciate the paintings and drawings you see in museums and galleries. The 36 lectures that make up this course run about 18 hours, but as I noted, the drawing projects are another matter. It could well take someone 8 months to over a year to work through all the exercises and assignments. People are routinely surprised at all the things artists actually consider when they draw. While they may have some inkling that proportion and light are important topics, they generally have little exposure to ideas about negative shape, line weight, or the use of value as a compositional tool. And some students are impatient to get to certain topics, like shading or the figure. So I'd like to take about 15 minutes and lay out before you the progression followed in this course. This way, you'll get a sense of how the parts connect and begin to appreciate how each piece is important to the whole endeavor. You can think about the lectures as divided into 6 conceptual sections. The first contains introductory materials. The second focuses on line and introduces formal language or drawing's grammar. The third section provides an overview of linear perspective. The fourth brings us back to finish our discussion of formal language while covering value, texture, and color. The fifth section focuses on the figure, and the final section details advanced approaches and projects. We've actually already started your study if you drew along with me earlier. Line's foundational, and it's actually quite complex. There are many kinds of line, each with different utilities and expressive potentials. At first, we'll speak about 2 types of line, contour and construction line. We'll see how together they can help us accurately draw simple shapes. And we'll use these simple shapes to draw everyday objects like the kinds of things found in still lifes, like this picture here. We'll learn how, by adding a third type of line, cross-contour, a line in the inside of the shape, we can create the illusion of volume and 3 dimensions in the objects we draw. You're probably already seeing how the drawing exercises we did earlier will pay off. To draw the picture and the block, we have to draw horizontal, vertical, diagonal, and curving lines. The lines have to relate to one another in terms of measure and meet at specific locations if we want to create the shapes we need. So keep practicing those lines. They're fundamental to everything we'll do. We'll talk about different types of shapes, including aggregate shape. Now that's a kind of shape that holds all our objects together compositionally in relation to the shape of the drawing itself. It will also help us control proportions, because it serves as a container for the objects we'll be drawing. We'll also learn about object-ground relations, essentially how all the main objects or subject in a drawing or painting relate to even larger shapes we call the ground shapes. And you'll learn how these shapes construct the shape of the drawing itself. Next, you'll learn about shapes between things, what we call negative shapes. You'll see how they hold a composition together and also how they can help you maintain accurate proportions. Once you understand negative shapes, you'll have a whole new appreciation for many great 19th and 20th century artists, from Bonnard to Picasso, from Matisse to Morandi. Having covered these materials, we'll be primed for a detailed investigation of composition. We'll talk about the different types of dynamics in the rectangle and the latent internal structures of rectangles, or armatures. And we'll learn how a range of artists have used these geometric relationships to compose still lifes, landscapes, and figure drawings. This is a drawing by the American artist Richard Diebenkorn. You can see how many of the visual elements hew to specific divisions or measures in the drawing's rectangle, things like the horizontal, vertical, and diagonal halves and quarters, and then their subdivisions. And you're going to apply these compositional strategies you've learned to drawings both from observation and from your imagination. As we're digging into composition, we'll learn about a fourth type of line, gestural line. Here's an example by Rembrandt. Note the speed with which it was drawn. Gesture is a very powerful tool that does the work of contour, cross-contour, and construction line all at once. And you learn how to use this direct, all-encompassing kind of line, gestural line, to work through compositional ideas with great rapidity, without having to draw every object in all its detail. And we'll speak about the many ways in which line qualities can be evocative and expressive. After delving into line and composition, we'll address the crucial problem of proportion. We'll learn how, during the Renaissance, artists began to develop specific tools and methods for solving these problems. We'll learn to use the gridded velo of the Renaissance polymath Alberti, depicted here in a woodcut by Albrecht Dürer. We'll use it to draw a deep interior space. And I think you'll be surprised how the proportions and angles all become understandable. And we'll study many other measuring techniques, including how to measure difficult angles using the metaphor of clock hands. Following proportions, we'll study the principles that govern the creation of the illusion of three-dimensional space on that flat page. We'll study the many ways in which artists as diverse as Leonardo and Van Gogh controlled this in their drawings and paintings, using diagonal lines, oblique planes, and geometric volumes, to name a few. At this point, if you've been working diligently, you'll have a lot of the knowledge you'll need to be able to tackle many complex drawing problems. You'll be able to challenge yourself with complex interior spaces. You'll also draw a master study focusing on line weight, proportion, volume, and space. And using what you've learned about line, composition, proportion, and spatial illusion, you'll be able to draw figures in complex interiors from observation, including a self-portrait, just as students do in my intro drawing course at the University of Washington. All these drawings are made with lines, horizontals, verticals, diagonals, and curved line segments. You'll be applying these skills you hone in drawing exercises like the ones we did earlier with these kinds of drawings. All the concepts and methods we'll use to establish proportion and the illusion of depth in these projects are referred to as empirical perspective. Following our study of empirical perspective, we'll study linear perspective. It's a really powerful tool. Taken together, empirical and linear perspective enabled artists to create images of astonishing verisimilitude, well beyond anything human beings have been able to accomplish prior to their use. The use of perspective is ubiquitous. It's at the heart of so much of the visual material we consume, from high art to animation to video games. We'll start out with some exercises. We'll build a solid, believable, and complex image without reference to observed reality. We'll draw a building in a landscape, and then we'll draw furniture and objects in the interior of the building as if we had X-ray vision. Using one-point perspective, we'll create a scaled, gridded room. If we imagine that each tile equals 1 square foot, we'll be able to measure distance in the three-dimensional space of the drawing. We'll also learn how we can create pattern and make those patterns recede in perspectival space. Once you've understood these basic principles, you'll be able to use all this knowledge along what we covered earlier to draw your own inventions from your imagination. Next, we'll really up the complexity with discussions of value, texture, and color. In one of the first lectures on value, we'll see how artists conceive of value, steps of light to dark, as a scale, just like a musical scale. Then we'll see how artists use different ranges of value to expressive effect in their own work. Here, a drawing on the light end of the scale. Here, a much more robust use of contrasting values. And we'll learn how, with each value palette, light, robust, or even just black and white, we can create a convincing illusion of light, space, and volume. As well as understanding the compositional implications of using value, you'll learn how you can create focal areas and focal points by controlling relative value contrasts. and you'll be able to apply everything you learn about value to drawing from observation. Things like still lifes, interiors, the head, and the figure. We'll also extend our study of value to see how it interfaces with linear perspective, and you'll learn how to project the shadows of basic forms. This will give you the tools you need to begin to draw and lighten shade from your imagination. Once you understand basic forms, you'll be able to turn them into everyday objects and draw still lifes and other kinds of drawings from your imaginations too. While we can apply value in a relatively smooth way, there's a whole world to be discovered in mark and texture. We'll study hatching and cross-hatching, and you'll apply it to your own drawings. And we'll investigate other ways artists have used mark for centuries, both in the East and in the West. And we'll also see how contemporary artists use mark making to great effect today. Following mark making and texture, you'll learn about color. We'll study the basics of color theory and learn about color properties. We'll also look at the relationship among the colors and various versions of the color wheel. More practically, we'll learn about the effects of light and color on three-dimensional form and space. We'll see how artists use all these ideas and think about color in terms of palettes. These are groupings or limitations of color that help us create qualities of light and mood. For example, here in this Vermeer, we find a fairly neutral orange-blue complementary system, while in this Wayne Thiebaud, we see a much more saturated yellow-violet system that's hinged on the three primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. The moods are clearly different, but in both we get the illusion of form and light, of space and volume. And we'll learn how we can create form and light in various moods, just like composers can inflect melodies in different keys or through different types of orchestration. As we did with value, we'll learn how we can use color compositionally to create a visual hierarchy with focal areas and focal points. You'll see how you can apply all these ideas to your own drawing to create different qualities of mood, light, and form. You'll apply these ideas to draw both from your imagination and from observation. In the next group of lectures, we'll zoom in on the human figure, and we'll approach the figure in several different ways which are geared to help you draw figures both from observation and from your imagination. We'll start with an examination of canons of proportion, and you'll learn how to build a figure out of a set of measures related to the parts of the body. We'll relate this to a study of the major bones in the body and draw figures uniting a canon of proportions with what you learn about the skeletal system. We'll go through the major muscle groups as well, and you'll use what you've learned to draw a self-portrait in 3 views, as well as figures from your imagination. We'll also talk about some specialized drawing problems, like how to approach the foreshortened figure. And we'll relate what we've learned about the figure to what we'd studied earlier, including our study of perspective, to draw figures from the imagination in imagined environments. The last 2 lectures, 35 and 36, extend into some more advanced concepts and projects. We'll consider changes that affected art in the late 19th century, including visual ideas that led to greater abstraction, and other forms of figuration that depend on synthesizing abstraction with multiple points of view and imaginative interpolations. Moving into areas involving fantasy and personal subject matter, from the imagination and from observation. We'll close with a discussion and a set of projects that are designed to help you begin to identify the kind of art you want to make and some thoughts on how to go about this. It took me about 15 minutes to outline the exercises and projects associated with this course. As I noted earlier, it could easily take a year or more to work through all this. It's equivalent to what you'd cover at a university in 4 academic quarters. The project suggested in the final 2 lectures could extend well beyond that. There's a natural progression in this sequence of study from concentrating more on acquiring knowledge, skill, and technique, and then thinking more about how to use it in reference to specific content related to your own interest. The goal at the beginning is mastery of the breadth of accumulated knowledge. As you advance, you'll be able to apply this knowledge and skill to your own individual creative vision. So take it slow, one piece at a time. If you do, you'll find each new piece building on what you've learned in prior lessons, and you'll be on your way to developing a depth of knowledge regarding many of the ways in which drawings are conceived of and made. Whether you choose to fully work through all the problems or not, just developing a conceptual understanding of the ways in which artists think and pursue their work will fundamentally change the way you see both art and the world around you.